Hello. This video is for IXL Activity 8.V.14. It is titled Write Equivalent Expressions Using Properties. And the 3-character code for this activity is Quebec Foxtrot Juliet. So this particular activity, you're doing basically it's kind of like a 2-column proof in geometry. Only we're not doing geometry, we're doing pre-algebra. Technically, I guess we're actually doing algebra because you see that we do have variables involved, like 7D. Anytime that you start incorporating variables into math, it falls into the category of algebra. And this activity looks a lot like what we see here from a textbook page. And if you watch the textbook videos, you'll realize we see something like this quite often, where on one side you have I could put this into a table. Picture it like this. If we created a table for this and for this page here, and it looks something like this, to where we had 2 columns and we separated this into 2 columns like this, and then each line was another row, and we would put all this into rows here, and I'll finish up doing that in just a moment. So I've put all of these into columns and rows, and what we see is that we have this line here, right? And it shows that from here to here is the distributive property, and then we multiply the 3x, the 3 times x to get 3x, and the 3 times 7 to get 21. And over here we show that we did that because we are multiplying. On the next one, you see again where we have distributive property multiplying the -2 times n and the -2 times 4 here, and that's distributive property. Then we need to multiply to get this line here, and we justify it by saying, hey, we multiplied. And then we go ahead and do this here by definition of subtraction, etc. So that's what we're doing in this activity. IXL 8.V.14 is that in one column we have the math going on, and in the column on the right we have the justification for each step. So it's somewhat like a proof. Did a lot of stuff like this in college years ago, so only the ones I did in college weren't quite this easy. So we start off with 7D times 3, and it says we're going to do the commutative property of multiplication. Well, remember, commutative property is grouping stuff. No, it's not. That's associative property, isn't it? Commutative property is where they change position. So if we put, let's see, 7D over here, we just reversed them. They change positions, right? So the 3 now comes, the 3 is the first factor. 7D is the second factor here. And then we multiply the 3 times the 7 to get 21, and we still have the D along there. I'm surprised that in this one that they didn't first have us go ahead and group these into the associative property there, but it looks like they just tell us to multiply. So the first one start off with them pretty much filled out for you, and then the more difficult that they get, the more lines that we're missing and we have to fill in. So let's look at the next one. Next one here we have 2 times z times 7z. 2 times 7z. So we're talking about associative property here. So associative is the one, now we can say that it's the one that uses parentheses. And we'll notice that initially that the z is associated with the 7 here, and now they've changed the parentheses. Let's do that here. If you think about, you take it and you now regroup the 2 with the 7, which is what they've done here. So this is associative property. So what factor is still missing that we don't see here? It's the z. So we're going to type in a z there. And then they tell us, okay, now we're going to multiply. Well, we don't know what z is. We can't multiply that, but we can do the 2 times 7, and that's going to be 14. So simplified, it says complete the expressions. Write each answer as a number, variable, or the product of a number and a variable. So I would call this simplifying this expression. I was looking for the word simplify there, but apparently they don't have it. On the next one, select the missing property. So whenever you do this on IXL, you don't have to come up with the property yourself, there'll be a drop down arrow. I believe it's on the right hand side. And so you'll click this arrow, and then a different list of different properties will all show up down here, and you have to click on the correct one and choose it. I think I can manage this without them suggesting the properties to me. I think I'll be okay on that. So I start up with 3W plus 9, and now I have the 3 times W. Notice that they separated it. 3 times W and 3 times 3. So this is what they call factor. And so they factor this out. The factors of 3W are 3 and W. And then the factors of 9 are 3 and 3. So they factor that down. And now, well, looky here. If we take parentheses and put around this and this, it starts to look like a property that you're kind of familiar with. What do we have that could come out of both of these parenthesis sets here, right? We have a 3 that could come out. We could pull a 3 out and pull a 3 out. And so those 3's come out, and there's that 3 there. And that leaves us with a W and the other 3 and the plus sign. So we see that W, the other 3, and the plus sign. So W plus 3, what's left over gets put into a set of parentheses. And this is the distributive property. So this is the distributive property. So you would hit that drop down button there, and from this list you would select the distributive property. On the next one, looks like I see they're all in the same order: 2D, 2, and 7. 2D, 2, and 7. So the order hasn't changed. However, it does appear that the groupings changed. 2D, the 2 here, this 2 is associated with the 2D. Well, now the 2 is associated with the 7, so this is going to be the associative property. So we'll select associative property, and that should be an R, not there we go, property. We'll just abbreviate there. And now we can go ahead and we get the 2D comes down, and so does the addition sign, and then 2 plus 7 is indeed 9, and that's just simply adding. On this next one here, let's take a look at it. Sometimes I have to look at these myself for a moment and see what's going on. It looks like we have a 6 and we have the 6. We have a 3 and we have a 3. We're missing the 7D. So 7D is what's going to go here. And why does it go there? Well, it looks like that these are changing position, right? The 6 and the 7D are changing position. So this is going to be the commutative property. And to be exact, you're going to have to select commutative property of addition, because there is a commutative property of multiplication as well. And they'll both be on the list. Whenever you click this button and the drop-down list is there, you'll have commutative property of addition and commutative property of multiplication. You see this is indeed addition, so we'll go ahead and select addition. Now, the next line says that we're adding. And so apparently we're adding the 6 plus 3 because we see the 7D is still there. So 6 plus 3 is 9. On this next one here, it is a wee bit tricky because we're going to have some distributive property that's not going to look like the distributive property that you're used to. So I'll take my time on this one and try to point that out. So let's go ahead and start this one off. It looks like these, if I look here, if I look at this and I look at this, this hasn't changed, has it? 5 times the quantity of 5x plus 7v, 5 times the quantity of 5x plus 7v. So that hasn't changed. I still have a parenthesis here. I still have the 3 out in front. But what's changed? Well, it looks like the 5 is now the first add-in inside of the parentheses. It's now comes first. And what's missing is the 7v. So these two have seemed to change position, right? They've swapped places. So they've moved. This is the commutative property. And notice that it is addition. So it's the commutative property of addition. So that would be commutative property of addition. I'm going to go ahead. Oh, I don't want to erase that 7v. I'll put it back. So let's put the 7v back. Now the next question is, what happens in this next one? Well, we end up with 5x plus 7v. And you'll notice that that is the same thing that's in parentheses here. And it's also now the same thing that's in parentheses here. So if we think of like larger brackets, let's put this into a bracket and put this into a bracket because we already have parentheses. So the next step up is to use brackets. And now what do we see is we see that we have two things being multiplied with addition in between. And we can factor these out. We're going to be able to factor out. But usually, let me go back. Let's step aside for a moment and think of something different. So normally, whenever we have the distributive property, we're used to seeing something like A times the quantity of B plus C. And then we would distribute that in. Did I say factoring? I meant to say the distributive property. And so we know that we would factor this in like this, and we get A times B. It is addition, so we'd have plus A times C. Now, if we pulled that back apart and we had A plus B, or A times B plus A times C, and we're like, okay, what can we take out of both of them? Well, an A will come out of both of them. We could pull an A out of both of them, and we would have the A, and then whatever's left over, we would put inside of parentheses, the B and the C, and then separated by the same operation of addition here, and we get right back to that A times the quantity of B plus C. So what's happening here in our example up here is pretty much the same thing, only instead of what we're taking out being just a simple one single variable, it's actually something in parentheses of its own. So just like there's an A in each of these and we can pull it out, well, here we have a 5x plus 7v, 5x plus 7v. So this is getting pulled out. So this whole parentheses thing. And since I got underlined, let's pull it from the bottom. So it's getting pulled out. And then we're also pulling this one out here, right? And to where we would have it all by itself. And we would have 5x plus 7v. Like I said, this one's a little bit complicated. And then what's left over? What's left over is a 3 and a 5. So that's a 3 and a 5 separated by the same sign here, which is plus. So we would end up with a, now you see here that this matches this. This here should match this here, so we need, what, a 5 in there? I'll end up erasing that whenever I erase everything, but we'll put it back. And so now you can see that this is indeed the distributive property that's going on. And this one here is a little tricky. Right now, most of what we've been doing, we've just been taking out one thing that we see here. But this is two things being multiplied by times each other. Here we have multiplication, here we have multiplication, and addition in between. Well, that's exactly what we have here. Let me go ahead and erase all this here so that we can kind of see that again. This is a 5. Oh, and that was a 7v. So what we have here is we have two things being multiplied, and addition sign. It's just that the thing that we're pulling out isn't just one number or one value or one variable. It's an entire parenthesis set, you might say, kind of like an expression side of a parenthesis. So these here are identical, so both of these are getting pulled out, and it shows up here. What's left over is the 3 and the 5, and those show up here separated by the addition sign. So that one there's a little tricky. That's some real upper level stuff there on that one, but it is the distributive property, and that's supposed to be 7v. Now we can go ahead, and it says to add, so we have 3 plus 5, and that is 8. All right, so that one there is probably one of the tougher ones that you're going to see, and that is up in like the 80s or the 90s, so it'll be a while before you bump into that one. On this one here, looks like they got even more stuff for us to fill out. So let's look and see what we got going on. We have 5 times the quantity of u times 7. And the 5's still outside the parentheses. The 7's still inside, but now it comes first, so the u must come second. And so we've changed position, right? So this is the commutative property. And it's not just a commutative property, it is the commutative property of, this is multiplication, so it's the commutative property of multiplication. Next, looks like the 5, 7u, 5, 7u. The order's not changing, but the grouping's changed, hasn't it? So now the 7 is no longer associated with the u, the 7's now associated with the 5. So this is the associative property of, and what's the operation? It's multiplication. So remember, there is associative property of addition as well. Now it says to multiply. 5 times 7 is 35. So 35u is our final answer. And this is the last one here. So let's look at what's going on here. Looks like we've got, well, if we put parentheses here, right, and we realize that, okay, that's 8 times 4, and here we have, over this side, 8 times 5q. So what we have going on this first line here is indeed the distributive property. Distributive property. Now we go ahead and multiply 8 times 4, and that is 32, right? And we have the 8 times 5, and that's 40, so we're good to go there. And now the next thing that they have us do is, well, 32 comes first, now it comes second. So this must be 40q, right? And they just change position. So that's commuting. So that's the commutative property of, and what's the operation? Addition. All right. So other than this bad boy right here, most of them weren't too bad. This one here, again, it's kind of tricky because they factored out this entire term of 5x plus 7, or the entire factor. That's actually 2 terms inside of, that's a lot of math vocabulary. I don't want to get lost on that. So at any rate, those are all of my examples for 8.V.14, write equivalent expressions using properties. Good luck with your activity.